Welcome to Fort Vancouver National Historical Site. This fall, we're unable to hold this event safely, so we've put a group of our volunteers together to film a series of Park After Dark videos, so you can learn more about people and places at Fort Vancouver. As we move into autumn, we hope you join us for this cozy evening. Fort Vancouver is a diverse community that includes Hudson's Bay Company officers, company employees, and their families. From 1825 to the mid-19th century, Fort Vancouver was regional headquarters of the Hudson's Bay Company's Columbia Department. In the 1840s, this became an important stop on the Oregon Trail. 1845 was an important year for Fort Vancouver, and it was an important year for the National Park Service. The fort you see today is a reconstruction built on the archaeological footprint of the original, which stood here until it burnt down in the 1860s. When the National Park Service began the reconstruction in the late 1960s, they decided to recreate the fort as it appeared in 1845. But why 1845? 1845 was a year of great change for this community. When Fort Vancouver was built 20 years earlier, this territory was home to indigenous people, tribes, and nations. British trading posts like Fort Vancouver dotted the landscape. The 1830s had waves of disease due to the increasing presence of trappers and settlers. By the 1840s, missionaries and American immigrants were crossing the Oregon Trail. These American immigrants formed a new government south of the Columbia River and challenged the Hudson's Bay Company's influence in the Northwest. At the same time, fur demand in Europe was on a decline, and the Hudson's Bay Company focused its attention to agricultural production. 1845 was an exciting time to be an American in the Pacific Northwest. Also, a challenging time to be a Hudson's Bay Company employee. It was also a time of threat for Native American people, as their lives would change forever. In this episode, you're going to learn about a 19th century kitchen, how it functioned, who worked in it, and who they served.
Hi, my name is Bob Prince. My character is Edward Spencer, who was the kitchen steward in 1845. The job of the steward, along with a couple of others that worked in here, was to prepare the food for Dr. McLaughlin and his family, and Mr. Douglas and his family. And what you see here in the kitchen for 1845 is a lot of differences from your kitchen at home today, based mainly on three things. There's no refrigeration, there's no electricity, and there's no running water. So that makes it quite different in terms of the way that we prepare food. So we don't have ice to prepare it. We did occasionally. There was ice on the river and we could use it for certain things. A big feature, the running water. Well, you go into your kitchen, you turn on a faucet. Here, that's not the case. We go with buckets out to the well and then bring it in here. Electricity speaks for itself. We're just doing what we do, and it's all done on the fire and in the oven. And another difference are some of the utensils that we used here. For instance, this in front of me right here, this was a potato masher. It's called a beetle. So this would have been made by our carpenters, and we would just use it in a mashing action like that, and that would take care of our mashing of potatoes. Other utensils that we had were spatulas, you're familiar with those, tasting spoons, ladles, strainers, and so forth. They accomplish the same thing that the tools do in your kitchens today. Well, right now I'm going to talk a little bit about the food, and I'm just going to sit down and we'll talk about what we have and where the food came from. Let's talk first about the garden. You may have heard something about it already, but we had a massive garden, a very big one. We had to be self-sustaining. So everything that we needed from the growing season all the way through to the next growing season had to be either available as a fresh item or it had to be in some way preserved. This is a good time right now, as you can see. We have cabbages, we have corn, we have cucumbers, we have tomatoes, peppers, melons, apples. We have different kinds of squash, and those are the things that we would be using right now. In addition to the garden, we had orchards. And in the orchards, we had primarily apples. They had a lot of apples here. But there were other fruits, such as pears and prunes and so forth. What did they do for meats? Well, they had a lot of livestock. They had cattle, they had hogs, they had sheep, they had flocks of chickens and turkeys. Those were the domesticated animals. Well, the cows were available for more than just meat. They provided us with milk and cream. Chickens provided us with eggs. Sheep provided us with wool. Pigs, however, became the primary protein, the primary meat. And the pig just didn't have another function except to provide food and to produce other pigs. And beside the garden and the orchards, we also had large fields of wheat and barley. And we used those, particularly the wheat, would have been ground at our mills to make flour. But there's a lot of things that are missing. We're missing sugars, we're missing spices, we're missing some of the other things. Where did they come from? We actually either had to purchase or we traded for them from the ships that came through. I had to order it. Well, ordering it meant writing it down, getting it onto the next ship, all the way to London. Then it had to be packed and brought here. And so in 1845, there was no difference from the beginning of the Fort period in the 1820s. It still took a long time for ships to make that trip from London to Fort Vancouver. Spices and herbs. Well, we grew a lot of herbs here at the fort in the garden. The more common ones, parsley and thyme, sage, they were all grown here. But others, the more exotic ones, star anise, cinnamon, ginger, those that you hear about, they had to be traded for. So as the ships made their way from London all the way around the Cape, back up to here with the various stops, they picked up the spices and the other herbs and other items that we would have needed. All right, let's talk about some of the preparation of the foods and the meals that were served here. First of all, we had breakfast. It consisted of meats because their diet was very meat heavy. They had some cereals and they had toasts and jams and so forth. And this would have all been served as a breakfast. The next meal of the day was dinner. And that was the main meal of the day. It started about 1 o'clock in the afternoon and could have lasted about 2 hours. They could have served anywhere from 5, 6, or 7 courses during that meal. And all of that food had to be prepared in this kitchen because that's where it all came from. Nothing was wasted in the preparation of the foods here. Okay, so you heard about the meals and that, but what about the drinks? What did they have to drink? Well, you think of coffee and tea. Neither coffee nor tea could have been produced here, so those are trade items again. They had a drink called shrub, and that was a popular drink here, and that was made out of syrups that were made out of the fruits that came from the garden, or sometimes the fruits that came from the orchards. They also had brandies and rums. They also had wines and beers. Well, everything was seasonal that I've talked about thus far. We had to preserve the foods so that we would have something to eat for the entire 4 seasons. So we had root cellars, which in turn kept potatoes and turnips and rutabagas. We kept any of the root vegetables in the root cellars, and they were kept cool in there. They were kept in barrels. We also kept cabbages in barrels, so we could use cabbage for most of the year. We salted foods, we brined foods, we preserved them in jars or crocks. We smoked meats. In fact, over the fire, if we had leftover a large piece of pork or something, we could leave that over the fire in the evening, and then by the morning it would be partially smoked, and then we could do that day after day after day. We also had smokehouses here. We would grind up meat and make sausages. The sausages would be smoked and then stored. We could make dried fish. These we got this idea from the Native Americans largely, because that's how they had their fish. They dried the fish and they kept it. We traded for the dried fish, or we dried it ourselves. In the hunting seasons, we could get venison, we could get elk, we could get rabbits, we could get squirrels, we could get game birds. The stewards were up at 4:30 in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning. They had to get the fires going. They had to get dough made for the breads. They had to get all the vegetables prepped. And there were also 2 or 3 young men who were aspiring stewards. They liked to do that, or they were assigned that job. And they would be in here to help. They would do the serving. They would do a lot of the cleanup. We'd have a soup pot on for the soup of the day, whatever it turned out to be. Salads were easy enough to prepare. But then the meats. How many people are we serving? 20 or 25? So it's not just getting a small amount of meat and cooking for a family of 4. It's cooking 4 or 5 times that. And so that makes it a lot more difficult. And look where we're cooking. We're cooking on this fireplace, this hearth. So things would be pre-made, they would be kept warm, you make them so far, you finish them off, you put the sauces on, you get ready to serve, you put them on plates, and you get ready. What we have here today is we have some creamed cabbage, we have stewed tomatoes, we have potatoes and squash, and there's the bell. So I've got to get this over there and get it up to the dining hall, and we're all done.